Well then, this is about part 3, isn't it, about the bread of life. And anyway, here we go again. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. And he says it not once but twice in this passage, I am the bread of life. So I think, when was the last time that you ate the bread of life? I'm not talking about the Eucharist, because I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about in today's Gospel reading. But I'm also not denying that communion can be and is the bread of life. But maybe it's just one slice, if you pardon the pun, of a larger loaf of bread. Maybe you and I are to become the bread of life, just like Jesus. Think about all the people, the relationships, the experiences that have fed and nourished and sustained each of our lives. Think about a time when someone else fed and nourished your life. And I mean just more than preparing a meal for you in a time of need. I'm talking about the kind of people that spend their time and their presence with us. I know it's been difficult over the past 18 months or so, but as we move on, it won't be that much of a difficulty. In whatever way they have spent time with us, whether it's physically, through a letter, through a telephone call, through a video call or whatever, they demonstrate that they love us. In some cases they might teach us. They demonstrate that they care for us. They encourage us. And we're left with our lives feeling fed and being nourished by them. Sometimes it's not even what they say or do. Just being in their presence is enough. It's bread itself. Now, if you think about it, aren't there some people that when you spend time with them, that you just feel well fed and full? Just think about somebody who might have offered you wisdom or guidance, who listened to your life story, who perhaps spoke a word of hope or encouragement in a difficult time that nourished and sustained your life. They were all bread for you. Maybe there was someone who helped you discover meaning or purpose in your life. Perhaps it was somebody who said, I forgive you, and you were then strengthened to move forward. Maybe somebody believed in you when you weren't so sure about yourself. Our lives are nourished and fed by others in thousands of ways. So, have you been fed by the life of another? And what if that's what Jesus is talking about when he speaks of himself as the bread of life? Because throughout the Gospels we see him feeding and nourishing life in so many ways, so many circumstances. Through his love, his presence, his guidance, his teaching, through his healing, forgiveness, mercy, through his generosity, compassion, and wisdom. This is the bread that feeds the soul. And these qualities aren't unique to Jesus, as the Apostle Paul reminds us in that reading from Ephesians. They can be ours as well. It's one way that God shares God's life with us. We both eat that bread of life and we become it. We partake of the bread of someone else's life, and our life is nourished. Our life is sustained. Our life is strengthened. I think that's why it's so important for us to meet as a church. The church is not a building, though what a glorious building it is. Church is people. It's people. And it's just a shame that there's not more people here to be able to understand that, facilitate that and practice that. So who would be that person for you who would sustain you and nourish you? What is his or her name? What did he or she do or say that fed your life? I think most of us would have a story to share about that. Also, the challenge is, when have each of us been bred in someone else's life? When have we fed and nourished them? When have you sustained them? When have you strengthened them? We so often hear Jesus say, I am the bread of life. And we assume that he is the only loaf in the basket. But what if that's not what he's saying? What if he's not claiming to be the exclusive loaf of bread in this world? What if he's teaching us what the bread of life looks like, so that we can find it in this world, so that we can become that bread, so we can be that bread for one another? The challenge is that can we believe that about ourselves, about another, about God? And often we don't. And that's the problem that the religious leaders and authorities have in the gospel reading today. They begin complaining because Jesus said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. The issue is not that they don't believe that God provides or that God feeds. We know that from the example of manna. The issue is that they know Jesus. They know his mum and his dad. They know where he's from. He's the kid from Nazareth. Presented with all those facts, how could he be the bread from heaven? That's often the problem for religious people like them. They know just enough that they can't know anything more, or consider that there could be more to know. They made Nazareth and heaven mutually exclusive. Can anything good come out of Oldham? We make heaven and Oldham mutually exclusive. He couldn't be from heaven because he's from Nazareth. He can't do any good because he speaks with a northern accent and he comes from Oldham. Luckily for us, we don't have that problem. We know that Jesus is from heaven. Earlier in this series, we heard about Jesus feeding the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But that's possibly only to get our attention, to tell us that it's not really about the bread or the fish. I think, as I might have hinted, it's about a way of living that the disciples failed to grasp. It's a way about relating. Even last week, he said, you've got to know the difference, Jesus said, between food that perishes and food that endures for eternal life. Between bread that is perishable and bread that is imperishable. And then he goes on about this bread of life stuff. The bread that lasts, the bread that endures, the bread that never runs out, the bread that never gets stale or mouldy. The reality is that there's a lot of bread in this world. For Jesus, however, the only bread that matters is the bread that endures, the bread of life. But if you look through the scriptures, you will find references, direct and indirect, to all sorts of bread. The bread of adversity, the bread of tears, the bread of affliction, the bread of mourning, the bread of wickedness, the bread of indifference, the bread of idleness, the bread of arrogance, the bread of lies, the bread of the stingy. And it goes on and on and on and on. So when you get right down to it, there's only really 2 kinds of bread. The bread of life that feeds, nourishes and sustains, and all the other bread that leaves us hungry and malnourished. So the challenge, I think, presented to us today is, what kind of bread are we eating? Does it fill and nourish us? Does it leave us hungry and malnourished? Is it sustaining and enduring, or has it become stale, hard and dry? The bread we choose to eat says something about our appetite and what we hunger for. So what do we hunger for? What's our appetite? Do we need a change in our diet to choose perhaps a different bread? Let's not forget the old saying that you are what you eat. If we want life, then we need to be eating the bread of life. If we want to bring life to another, then we need to be the bread of life to another. So what kind of bread will you eat this week? What kind of bread will you be for another this week? Amen.